Shown here is a new set of struts for the Mini. If you're going to be changing them out, you will first need to safely lift and support your vehicle. For additional assistance with that task, please follow the link provided at the end of this video. Start by removing the grommets holding the ABS sensor, yellow arrow, and the brake line, green arrow, from the strut. You can use a small screwdriver and carefully pry them out. This image shows the sway bar link that connects the sway bar to the strut. Each end, green arrow, is a ball joint which allows the link to rotate as the strut and sway bar move. Remove the upper and lower connections of the sway bar link to the strut. You will need to counterhold the ball joint with a hex driver while you loosen and remove the 16mm nut holding it in place. Shown here is the lower sway bar connection with the 16mm nut removed. A long hex key driver may be helpful to clear the sway bar while removing the nut. It's a good idea to support the whole strut wheel housing assembly while you are working on it. A good spot is right underneath the control arm behind the outer ball joint. Remove the 16mm nut securing the tie rod end to the wheel housing. You may need to counterhold the whole strut assembly with your other hand to keep it from moving. It also helps to turn the steering wheel all the way to one side for more access. Use a tie rod end puller as shown here, and it will make quick work of separating the tie rod end. Shown here is the tie rod end removed from the wheel housing. You may want to clean the mating surfaces if there is any buildup of corrosion. Remove the two 13mm bolts, green arrows, securing the outer ball joint to the bottom of the wheel housing. This allows the wheel housing to move downward and slide off the strut assembly. Carefully lower the floor jack and pull the control arm downward. This will pull the outer ball joint out of the wheel housing. There is a large 18mm bolt, also called a pinch bolt, secures the strut assembly inside the wheel housing like a vise. Place the floor jack under the wheel housing and remove the bolt. Be careful, as there will be nothing securing the wheel housing to the strut once it is removed. Shown here is the wheel housing sliding off of the strut. It may take a bit of effort to loosen up the collar. Spray a little lubricant around the shock and rock it back and forth while it's sitting on the floor jack. Be careful, as the housing is very heavy. With the wheel housing removed from the strut, the only things securing the strut assembly to the car are three 13mm nuts on the top of the wheel arches, green arrows. Have a helper hold the strut assembly and remove the nuts. You can now pull the strut assembly out of the car. Do not forget to remove the protective dust cover off the top of the strut. Secure the strut assembly in a vise or by other means and install your spring compressors over the coil spring. You want to have them exactly opposite of each other to apply equal pressure to either side of the spring. This takes the load off the spring and allows you to remove the top nut. Use an impact wrench to quickly zap the top nut off the assembly once the spring compressors are installed. Remove the upper strut mount, washers, bump stop, and the compressed spring assembly from the strut and set it aside. Put the new strut in a vise using a towel or rag to protect it, and fit the plastic dust sleeve over the strut rod. Fit the rubber coil spring pad over the strut rod and down to the bottom of the spring seat. Make sure that the pad fits into the step at the bottom correctly as indicated by the green arrow. Reinstall the old spring or a new performance spring over the strut. For sport struts, you'll want to install performance springs like Eibach or H&R. These will stiffen the suspension and lower the overall ride height of your vehicle. When installing the spring, make sure that it fits into the rubber pad correctly. The end of the spring fits into the pocket on the rubber spring pad, yellow arrow, and the spring pad fits into the step on the bottom of the spring seat. The whole assembly can easily rotate out of position, so keep an eye on it. Once the spring is in place, fit the upper spring pad to the top of the spring, making sure the coil end fits into the step on the pad, green arrow. Fit the upper spring retaining plate over the spring pad, making sure that the step in the plate is at the appropriate position on the spring. There are two washers that fit over the top of the spring retaining plate. First, fit the thicker washer over the strut rod and the retaining plate, green arrow. Fit the thinner washer, yellow arrow, over the thicker washer, green arrow. Next, fit the new strut mount over the strut rod and down onto the retainer plate. Thread the new nut on the strut rod and use an impact wrench to zap it down all the way. Make sure that you hold the spring in place as you tighten it. The rotation of the strut rod can cause the spring to pop out of the spring plate pads. You may even want to make sure the nut threads on enough to stay in place and relieve some of the tension on the spring compressor to lock everything in place. Shown here is the completed strut assembly with the spring compressors removed and ready to be installed in the car. Installation is the reverse of removal. Keep in mind that it will take a little bit of time for the new shocks to settle, so don't be surprised if the car sits a little higher than you expected at first. If you have a later R55, 56, or 57 Mini Cooper or Cooper S, there will be a camber pin, green arrow, on the upper strut mount. Please make sure you seat this correctly when reinstalling the strut. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and check out another video in this series.